All right, let's jump right in. We're about to see how a couple of, get this, 18th century economic theories can actually solve one of the biggest, most annoying arguments in modern relationships. I know, it sounds a little out there, but trust me on this.
So, let me ask you something. When you think about what couples really fight about, what's the very first thing that pops into your head?
Okay, you're probably thinking sex, right? Or maybe meddling in-laws, or the big one, money. And look, all of those are definitely classic fight starters, but believe it or not, they aren't the number one culprit.
Nope, it's this. The dishes, the laundry, the endless, thankless, day-in, day-out grind of household chores. And this isn't just a small annoyance. According to a huge Pew Research survey, sharing chores is the third most important factor for a successful marriage. That's right up there with faithfulness and a good sex life. The stakes are that high.
So how in the world do we win this great chore war? Well, the answer, and this is the crazy part, comes from a couple of brilliant economic minds from way back in the 17 and 1800s.
First up, we've got the godfather of modern economics himself, Adam Smith. His big idea was that the real secret to a nation's wealth wasn't gold or cash, it was labor. And more specifically, it was all about specialization. The idea that instead of everybody trying to do a little bit of everything, you get way more done when people focus on what they're good at.
Now here's the funny part. Adam Smith, total lifelong bachelor, lived with his mom his entire life. So, he probably never had to argue about whose turn it was to take out the trash. But his insights into how systems work efficiently, they are pure gold for our relationships. And his famous pin factory example just nails this point. Smith pointed out that if one guy tried to make a single pin all by himself, from stretching the wire to putting the head on, he might, maybe, make one pin a day. Maybe. But if you get 10 workers and each one specializes in just one tiny part of the process, together they could crank out a mind-blowing 48,000 pins in one day. That right there is the insane power of specialization.
Okay, but specialization is only half the story, right? That brings us to our next economist, David Ricardo. He's going to help us figure out the really tricky part. Who should be doing what?
So Ricardo came up with this absolute game changer of an idea called comparative advantage. And here's the key thing to get. It's not about who is flat out the best or fastest at something. That's called absolute advantage. No, this is about who gives up the least to do it. It's about opportunity cost. Who has less to lose by taking on that task? Let's use his classic example to make this super clear. You've got Portugal and England. Now look at the chart. Portugal is just faster at making both wine and knickers. So they have the absolute advantage in everything. The obvious thought is, well, Portugal should just make everything themselves, right? Wrong. If they both try to make one of each, it takes Portugal 30 minutes and it takes England 90 minutes. That's a grand total of 120 minutes of work.
But now, watch what happens when they specialize and trade. Portugal is way better at making wine compared to England, so they have the comparative advantage there. They make 2 bottles of wine, it takes them 20 minutes. England, meanwhile, specializes in the knickers. They make 2 pairs, which takes them 60 minutes. They trade 1 for 1, and look at this. Portugal just saved 10 minutes. In England, they saved a whole 30 minutes. It's not magic, it's just brilliant economics. Both countries come out ahead, even though one of them was technically better at both jobs.
Okay, I know what you're thinking. What does 19th century international trade have to do with who unloads the dishwasher? Well, everything. Your relationship, your household, it's like a tiny 2-person economy. And these exact same principles apply.
See, most of us run our household on a model of bad economics. We get totally hung up on this idea of a strict, fair 50-50 split. But that just leads to constant scorekeeping and resentment, right? Good economics says, forget the 50-50 obsession. Specialize based on your comparative advantage, who's relatively more efficient, and you will both end up with more free time. It's a win-win.
All right, let's look at a real-life case study. Meet Eric and Nancy. They were a super modern couple, and for them, fairness meant splitting every single thing right down the middle. This actually led them to create these crazy detailed chore logs to track every task and make sure things were perfectly even. So here's their old system. Now, Nancy was actually faster at both doing the dishes and tidying up. But under their fair 50-50 system, where they each did half of the dishes and half of the tidying, just look at these numbers. Together, they were spending 360 minutes a week. That's 6 hours on just these 2 chores. And you can see this huge gap in how long it took each of them to do their fair share. Okay, now watch what happens when they apply Ricardo's comparative advantage. It turns out Nancy is way more efficient at tidying, so that's her specialty, and Eric, relatively speaking, has the edge with the dishes. So he takes over all the dishes. And the result? Nancy saves herself 30 minutes a week, and Eric, he gets back a whopping 90 minutes. It's not equal in terms of the clock, but here's the thing. They are both so much better off.
The bottom line is this. By specializing, they literally created 2 extra hours of free time for themselves every single week. That's more time for TV, more time for hobbies, or, as the source cheekily points out, more time for other things. Thank you, David Ricardo.
But what happens when life throws a major wrench in the works? Like, say, you have kids, and your once perfectly oiled system just completely falls apart.
Well, in economics, this is what's known as a market failure. It's when the whole system becomes super inefficient because some things, some really important bits of work, just aren't being valued properly. And that is exactly what happened to our next couple, Nora and Andrew, after they had kids.
And, the signs of a marriage market failure can be, they can be pretty obvious and honestly kind of funny. You're in trouble if you're eagerly looking forward to a dentist appointment on a Saturday just to get a break, or if military push-ups are suddenly sounding more appealing than sex. Your domestic market is officially in crisis.
So, the solution for Nora and Andrew came from yet another economist, an Italian guy named Vilfredo Pareto. He came up with this idea called Pareto efficiency, and it's basically the ultimate goal. It's that sweet spot where you can't make one person better off without making the other person worse off. It's all about finding those win-win trades. And you gotta love this. Another great little historical aside for you. Apparently, Pareto developed this entire groundbreaking economic theory while he had like 24 Angora cats just sitting on his shoulders while he worked. You really can't make this stuff up.
Let's make this super simple with a pizza analogy. Imagine we split a pizza, 50-50. I'm totally stuffed after 3 slices, but you're still hungry. If I give you my last slice, it makes you way happier, and it costs me literally nothing because I was done anyway. That simple exchange, that is a Pareto-efficient move. It's not about a fair 50-50 split of the pizza, it's about maximizing our total collective happiness.
Okay, so let's bring this all home. Let's really rethink what a fair deal in a relationship actually means.
Look, the goal isn't to have a perfectly balanced spreadsheet where every single minute of work is tracked and accounted for. That is a recipe for disaster and resentment. The real goal, the smarter goal, is to build an efficient system based on your combined strengths, a system that actually generates more free time and more happiness for both of you, as a team.
So I'll just leave you with this one question to chew on. When you look at your own household, your own relationship, are you chasing a system that's equal, or are you building one that's truly efficient? Because the answer to that question could unlock a whole lot more happiness and a whole lot less fighting over whose turn it is to do the dishes.